I'm Su Jin Jez. I'm the CEO of California Competes, Higher Education for a Strong Economy. Thank you for joining us for this webinar focused on leveraging data to expand opportunity in California. I think the thing that many of us, particularly in higher ed, are thinking a lot about are the recent news about the Supreme Court rulings around affirmative action, around student debt forgiveness. And so as we were planning this event, long before the rulings came out, when the rulings came out, and really made us think about how important it is to understand what's going on in our state as we think about policymaking, which can happen obviously via the legislature, but also via the courts. So we wanted to take this moment to think about what's happening in our state, what's been happening in our state, and then how do we ensure that our state's economy, which is so dependent on shared participation, that we can make sure that happens. And we know that college, higher education is a key part of that. A few housekeeping items before we start. To submit a question, please click on the Q&A icon in the control panel. We will have time at the end for those questions, and then the California Competes team will also be answering questions via chat that are sort of questions that can be easily answered via chat. The slides and the recording will be posted on our website, californiacompetes.org, and will be sent out to all registrants following the event. Right. So I'd love to begin by learning more about who joined us for this discussion today. Our panelists for this webinar are stakeholders representing all parts of the education and work continuum. So you should have popped up on your Zoom a Zoom poll. Please take a moment to enter that poll, and I will share who's here with us. And that will also help us tailor our remarks, questions, and discussion to best suit our audience. So where do you fall in this education to workforce ecosystem? So we have question 1, students, K-12, higher ed, employer industry, policy, legislative, research, philanthropy, other, and I know folks can fall into more than one category, so please check all those that apply. And we also want to know about what region in California you're joining us from, or does your work focus on? So pick the one that most makes sense to you. I want to flag that these are not the regions that we use in our dashboard, but Zoom limits us to a smaller set of multiple choice options. So we put some groups together. All right. Great. So let's go ahead and share the results. All right. So looking at who is here, what part of the education and workforce ecosystem do you represent? We see a good number, not surprisingly, from higher education, a little over half. Another fair chunk representing research orgs, about a quarter, and then policy legislative, 16%, K-12, 16%, some that represent students, 6%, which is great. All right, philanthropy, 9%, and other 8%. If you're part of the other category, I would love if you want to share in chat, where are you coming to us from? Who did we miss? And let's look at regions. What regions are represented in this? We see a lot of folks coming from the North Central region, Sacramento, San Joaquin. Let's see, who else we have? LA and Orange counties, 20%. Representing statewide orgs, 14%. And then Bay Area, 18%. Great, well, thank you for joining us. So of today's agenda, we are going to be talking about the role of data. Like, why do we care about data? Why is it important for advancing equity in our state? I'm going to share a little bit around the Postsecondary Prosperity Dashboard, and then we'll have time with our amazing panel, a discussion I'll facilitate, and then opening things up for questions for you participating. Some perks of participating live, right, and not just watching the recording after. So who do we have on our panel today? I will introduce them briefly right now, and I will do a fuller introduction later. But I want to welcome our panelists. We have Cohn, who is a professor emeritus and senior research fellow at Claremont Graduate University. Also former superintendent of San Diego Unified and Long Beach Unified School Districts, and former executive director of the California Collaborative for Educational Excellence. I'll also flag is a board member of California Competes. We also have joining us from higher ed, Valerie Lundy-Wagner, who's Vice Chancellor for Digital Innovation and Infrastructure at California Community Colleges. I also want to flag, I believe the dashboard started under Valerie's leadership when she was at California Competes. And then representing our business community, Lauren Kay, who's the president of California Foundation for Commerce and Education related to the California Chamber of Commerce. Thank you all for joining us. I'd like to welcome you, and we will jump into a little bit around data on the dashboard, and we'll come back to the panel for discussion in a few minutes. So some of you may know who we are, but some of you may not. So I will take a moment and introduce California Competes. So California Competes, we aim to solve the state's most pressing social and economic problems by conducting rigorous higher education and workforce policy research. We use that research to guide decision makers and policymakers in designing and implementing solutions that strengthen our economy and help our communities thrive. We view higher education as both a vaccine and an antidote against economic stagnation and social stratification for individual Californians, for our communities, and for the state's economy. We believe long-term economic growth for California will be accomplished through shared prosperity. Our economy requires more equitable opportunities. And key to that is understanding opportunity and equity across our state. So we focus on 4 key issue areas. Our policy priorities are higher education and workforce alignment. How can higher ed really claim its responsibilities and roles in supporting our state's workforce? College and access and success for adult learners. How does higher ed open itself up to be an opportunity for those who missed the opportunity to matriculate into and complete college right out of high school? Effective and accessible online education. What and how can online ed be used as a tool to open access and success to a greater number of Californians? And coordinated policy setting and implementation. How do we center the Californian in our policy making and setting and policy setting and implementation rather than the silos of state agencies and bureaucracies? How can state agencies work together to support the Californian? So this conversation today is going to be specifically around data. Why does data matter for promoting equity? Data offers us a really important tool for stakeholders across sectors to understand, evaluate, and make decisions to better serve all students and constituents, but particularly those who have been and are currently marginalized. Data helps identify opportunity gaps. By examining data, we get a closer look at the experiences and trends at the ground level. What is working, what is not, where the opportunity gaps are. For the state of California, we have 3 public higher education segments, 116 community colleges, 23 California state universities, and 9 University of California campuses, all scattered across the state's very diverse regions. Not to mention our robust private post-secondary institutions. We have over 1,000 K-12 school districts with large disparities in resources and student success rates, and various systems that are often siloed. California has a few areas that hold enormous amounts of wealth and opportunity, but that's not the reality for other parts of the state, and frankly, most of Californians. We're at once one of the world's largest economies and also have the highest poverty rate in the nation. Data enables us to get it on a granular level and provides a more accurate picture of how our systems are and are not yet equitably serving all of our residents and all of our communities. It helps support planning and resource allocation. By then getting an accurate picture, policymakers and decision makers can pinpoint areas of greatest need and plan, improve, or tailor an appropriate intervention to address barriers and meet specific needs. They have resources they must allocate. Data can help with this. Informs collective action and change. When data is linked and at the center of efforts across sectors, it helps facilitate an ingrained cultural process that prioritizes coordination and decision-making. It highlights that all sectors are interconnected and can have huge impacts on one another, facilitating collaboration, partnerships, and capacity building for improvement. And fourth, measures progress and outcomes. What we traditionally think of when we think of data. It serves as a tool to monitor the progress towards goals and make adjustments to practices and programs where needed. It highlights consequences and pain points and also uplifts successful practices that can then be shared across systems. So at California Competes, we saw how hard it was to find the data we needed to understand opportunity in our state. So what we did was, well, we're advocating for the state's launch of the California Cradle to Career Data System, which will help paint a really clear picture of opportunity across our state and all of the four sort of main components that I just mentioned on the previous slide. But until then, we're building, or we have built a dashboard that links together 15 data sources to help us more fully understand the opportunity in California, who is flourishing and who is struggling. It allows us to examine post-secondary, workforce, and quality of life across the state through a variety of data visualizations. We first launched this a couple years ago, and I'm happy to release this updated version. Thank you to our funders, ECMC Foundation and Michelson 20mm for their support for the development and communications of this tool. So in building this, we really are concerned about issues of equity and opportunity in our state. To do this, we compare metrics across regions and counties, by race and ethnicity, by gender, by income, by everything we could get our hands on. And this year, I'm happy to share things like parenting status, incarceration status, which will help lead to a conversation that builds the transformation of our state. I'll run through a test drive of our updated dashboard in a moment, and I will highlight some of the expanded capabilities, the new metrics. The dashboard has thousands of data points though, and I encourage you to take a look and dig in on your own. I or someone from the California Competes team, we're also happy to meet with you, your organization, and share the data with you and help facilitate conversations around using the dashboard. Perfect. I'm going to pause the share for a moment and switch over to the dashboard. All right, so we are now magically teleported. So you can get to this dashboard by going to P2P, which is Post-Secondary Prosperity, p2p.californiacompetes.org. So this is the homepage of the dashboard. So from this, you can click, just go to statewide data, or you could also click to go to any region that you see on the map there. We also highlighted, if you scroll down, some key state stats. Whether it's high school graduates who completed the required courses for the CSU or UC admissions, high school graduates, households earning a living wage, access to a doctor's office. And so I'm going to pick one of them. I mean, fresh off of the Supreme Court decision, the percent of Californians who took out student loans. Statewide, it's 42.4%. If I click on that metric, you can see now we have a heat map up top that shows the differences across our state. So you can see dramatic differences between who takes out student loans in our state, and the ones that have hashes through them are regions where counties specifically that we didn't have enough data to provide information on that. Great. So I'm going to click on statewide data first. I'm sorry you can't see my cursor click on them. My cursor decided to disappear, so I'm having to just point and click. Oh dear, my screen is not working. I'm going to pause for a bit. Carolyn, maybe you could do a share screen for us. Carolyn, do I need to stop share for you to do the share screen, or are you able just to take over?
I think I can take over. 1 second.
Okay. All right, well, Carolyn switches that over. I'm going to talk about some of the key highlights of the new dashboard. So some of the things that we added to this new dashboard are we'd had statewide data, which I shared. We had regional data. We're now able to break it down to county level data. So you could look at opportunity by county in our state. We also provided more disaggregated data. I had mentioned now when available, we also have data on parenting students or parenting Californians, those with dependents. We also have data disaggregated when available by Californians who are institutionalized. And for those, for younger Californians, those are people that are almost like 95% incarcerated. I'm also happy to share that we were also able to add race and gender interactions. So before we had race as a disaggregation, and then we also had gender separately, but now you could look at, for example, differences between Black men and Black women. So as we saw during the pandemic, I think very acutely, a lot of these differences by specific characteristics became exacerbated, and we saw how important it was to really include those in the dashboard when we're able to. We also were able to include in this update data on immigration status. So for Californians who were born here versus Californians who immigrated here, and we could see differences in opportunity by immigration status. We also added some new, those are the new disaggregations we have where possible. We also added some new data points. So new data points we added were a wage premium for a college degree. Increasingly, we're seeing conversations around, does a college degree matter? And frankly, it matters more than ever. But these questions still come up. So we wanted to be able to include it in the dashboard to make clear the differences, across our state by whether or not you have a degree, but also what is that college degree premium? What's the sort of economic benefit for getting a college degree? We also include a metric on economic mobility. So to assess the extent of upward economic mobility experience across different communities. So you could see what's the likelihood that someone has a better life than their parent by across the state. And not surprisingly, economic mobility differs across the state. We also, childcare was another thing that we also talked a lot about during the pandemic. And in this iteration, we also included metrics on cost and affordability of childcare. So I think, we saw, particularly for women, to get back into the workforce, but we also saw during the pandemic, so many childcare providers closed, and big concerns, anticipation that they will never open again. And obviously this impacts the availability and the cost of childcare, which is really, really important for, for our workforce. And also, frankly, just for people to be able to access higher ed. Let's see, it looks like Carolyn's getting back up. Great, since we have mostly folks, or over half the folks here come from the higher ed community, let's choose a couple post-secondary ones. I will just follow along, Carolyn, if you want to highlight some, and I will talk to them. So the first metric we have on our post-secondary is, what's the level of educational attainment in this area? So this is statewide. So you can see statewide, the level of educational attainment is 37.1%. And then when you click on the bar, as Carolyn just did, you can see this is the disaggregations I just mentioned to you. So you can see having a bachelor's degree varies significantly by race and ethnicity. And one thing I'm really proud of in our dashboard is that we're able to disaggregate race and ethnicity by finer grained metrics. So not just the typical Black, white, Asian, Latinx, but we're able to see, for example, for the Asian diaspora, differences by Asian Californian group. So you can see here, Southeast Asians and South Asians have dramatically different levels of bachelor degree attainment. And so when we don't further disaggregate groups, we don't really understand these differences. And it's really, really important for us to do. I saw in the chat that popped up, okay, we could actually go to the next one. What's another fun one, Carolyn? All right, let's look at this one. So Carolyn's demonstrating how we can hover over things. So looking at this one, where do high school graduates go to college? So when you hover over a bar, you can see differences by region. So for community colleges, statewide, 35.6% of high school graduates go to a community college, but you can see this differs a lot by region. Central Sierra, it's about 30.5%, and in Imperial, about 57.6%. So we realize when we get data, we need a lot of context. Like, is 35.6% good? Is it bad? How does that differ? So we try to provide as much context as possible. I see popped up on my screen. Can we magnify the screen a bit with the 3 dots in the top right corner? There we go. All right. Thank you, Lionel. I know I was bending over to read it too. Other cool thing we added to this is you're able to toggle when available between numbers and percents. So sometimes you want to actually know, what does that number look like in my region? If you're using this for planning, perhaps it's useful to know, okay, am I going to have 30,000 students? In the past, we've come from my high school to community college, or is it 10,000? So we wanted to have the number and the percent available for individuals. And then if you have a question about, wait, what is this metric? How do they determine this? Where's this data from? You can hover over the information button and you get information, more specific information on the metric and the source of the data. Next to that, if you wanted to share the data, the chart with someone, we have those links. Send a URL or copies a URL so that you could send someone directly to this data point. So we know sometimes we would want to share something that's on the dashboard, and it's nice to be able to say, to find that direct URL to perhaps the metric for your county specifically, and you can do that now. And then let's say you're building a report or you want to share something with a number of people and don't want to make them click a link. What you can do is you can sort of like what we call shop for data. So this download point tool lets you pick the chart you want. You could do it as a PDF or a CSV, like an Excel type table. And then you basically add it to a shopping cart. So you could get as many sort of metrics as you want, and then it all saves together, and then you could export it together. And then you could clear them out. So we're really excited about this dashboard. Great. So Carolyn's also showing that you could zoom in and you could go to counties here, so Kern County or the region, and then you get county specific data. So you see it shifts over. So you can see here certificates. If we wanted to know what people are completing degrees in. If you wanted to see retention rates, transfer completion, racial diversity of colleges in the area. Great. All right. I know that there's a lot of questions coming in through chat and the Q&A. So I will free Carolyn up to help answer some of those questions, and then we can jump over to the discussion. So if I could have our panelists join us on video, that would be great. Perfect. Okay. So I will take a moment here and introduce our panelists more completely, and then we'll jump into some questions that I have prepared, but we want to save time for the participants to ask their questions too. So I kicked it off earlier with Dr. Carl Cohn. So I had mentioned he's an emeritus professor of Claremont Graduate University School of Education and a distinguished figure in the field of education. With over 30 years of experience, he has served in various roles such as teacher, counselor, professor, superintendent, and federal court monitor. Notably, he held superintendent positions in Long Beach and San Diego school districts. And during his tenure during Long Beach, he was honored to receive the prestigious McGraw Prize in 2012, and the district under his leadership won the Broad Prize in 2003. Additionally, Dr. Cohn contributes to California Competes as one of its board members, and I will editorialize and say, well known as one of our country's best urban superintendents, and is still contributing his knowledge to the field and supporting districts across our state. Thank you for joining us, Dr. Cohn. I'm also thrilled to have us be joined by Lauren Kay. Lauren Kay is the president of the California Foundation for Commerce and Education, which is affiliated with the California Chamber of Commerce and serves as a think tank for the California business community. He's devoted his career to developing, analyzing, and implementing public policy issues in California, with a special emphasis on improving the state's business and economic climate. I will also share that the first time I had met Lauren, he had asked we were in a meeting with a number of folks about, talk to me about why is the cradle to career data system important for the business community? And I feel like that sort of launched my relationship with Lauren, was around data, business, higher ed, and the importance of this role. And I feel like Lauren for being a go-to for California Competes and helping us connect with the business community and think through these issues. Last but not least, Dr. Valerie Lundy-Wagner, who serves as Vice Chancellor of the Digital Innovation and Infrastructure Division at the California Community Colleges, where she oversees technology and research. She leads a variety of internal and external initiatives overseeing information technology systems, implementation of more than 100 million in system-wide technology investments, and development of research into evidence-based policy. Formerly, she was one of California Competes' first researchers working on the development of the dashboard. So thank you, Dr. Lundy-Wagner. And I always appreciate your keen insights, your tough questions, and then also I think making visible the sometimes invisible parts of data and technology systems, and the amount of work that goes into making sure that we don't notice how they work. So thank you for joining us. So I have a couple questions I would like to ask each of you, and then I definitely want to save time for our participants to ask questions too. So I kicked this off thinking about the recent Supreme Court decisions related to affirmative action and student loan forgiveness, which has raised concerns amongst higher education advocates, business leaders too, about backtracking efforts to close and to create opportunity, frankly, across our nation. California, in some ways, is in a different position than many other states in that we've had a ban on affirmative action. We have pretty robust financial aid and low-cost higher ed institutions, but these are things that will still be felt in California. So one thing that I've been thinking about, and would love to hear how you're thinking about, is how can we leverage data to double down on our efforts in creating equitable pathways to higher education and economic opportunities for all Californians. I'll turn this over to Dr. Lundy-Wagner to jump in first. Valerie.
Sure. Thank you for inviting me to be here and showcasing the dashboard. Obviously it has a special place in my heart. The Supreme Court rulings last week were certainly a blow to I think our psyches around sort of what is happening as our country continues to become more and more diverse. But I think the reality in California is, we've been living with Prop 209 for some time now. And so, the case last week did not say that things like race could not ever be considered. It could not be sort of the primary or focal decision point around sort of allocating resources or admissions, et cetera. That said, it's still a blow. And I think as we think about some of the larger contexts that we live in, where residential segregation plays a role in the type of schools and institutions you have access to, the type of businesses and workforce development that is in your local area, it's important for us to just keep that in mind as we understand who lives where, what sort of opportunities are associated with those localities, and what local and state and even federal policy levers can be used to not only address any gaps that we see within the data, but also to really continuously be engaging with conversations about what does post-secondary access mean, whether it's dual enrollment, whether it's going back to get reskilled because you've been laid off. What does it mean? I think also, I think an understudied bit of this is how financial aid implicates pathways and successful pathways and what that looks like in the context of geography. And so that's something I would certainly challenge people to try to put together as they look at the dashboard. But again, all was not lost last week, but there are some larger contextual issues I think we should be engaging in.
Thank you, Valerie. I want to jump to Carl next. Carl, one thing that I think I went to undergrad at UC Berkeley and I went to grad school at Stanford. And one of the things that really struck me when I toured Stanford was there were a lot of Black students. So one thing I think this could hit hard are private institutions. And I, as Professor Emeritus at Claremont Graduate University, I'd be curious also thinking about the implications around thinking about data for that, but also thinking about, your role, in the statewide position, supporting the 1,000 school districts in our state, sort of what you saw from that work and thinking about opportunity across our state.
Sure. It was a real eye-opener for me heading up this new state agency. For a long time, I had been in the bubble of the large urban districts. I had not seen the rest of California. And when I got out there, it was like, oh my God. One of the things I sort of famously did was to go to Modoc County up in the northeastern part of California. Not a single foster parent eligible in that entire county. 5 mental health positions going unfilled. The most needed job, that of a bus driver to get kids to school. And so it was a huge eye-opener going to these places, Greenfield in South Monterey County, Dos Palos, or Loma in Merced, and actually seeing what the challenges were from the point of view of data. And I think what you're doing with this dashboard is just going to be a huge help. The other place that we went first with this new state agency was out in Blythe on the California-Arizona border. We got there and we said, what moves the economy here? And they said 2 things, agriculture and the 2 state prisons, Ironwood and Chuckawalla Valley. That's it. So I'm pushing higher ed, and we went to visit the prison, I encounter a correctional guard who's making $120 a year with overtime. And I asked him, would you share with me what your education level is? And he said, I'm the proud holder of a GED. And so I was like, what am I doing out here pushing higher education all over the state when I'm encountering things on the ground that are quite different? So for me, this idea of this dashboard is critical and important.
Thank you, Carl. I feel like it's so useful to be reminded. I feel like about the incredible diversity of our state. Both economic, racially, and sort of what what opportunities higher ed opens up. But also, I think it can be easy to forget that much of the state is not like wherever we are living. Chances are it is not like wherever we are living. Lauren, would love to hear, you and I have talked about data and the importance for the business community. I know Cal Chamber had taken a position to support the repeal of affirmative action, that proposition. Was it last year? I lose time these days. But how is the business community thinking about the use of data and sort of how it can strengthen employment in our state and, our industry?
Well, thank you, Su Jin. And it's I really appreciate the opportunity to join you today and to see my old colleague, my long-standing colleague, Carl, who I haven't seen for some time. I'll just second what he said. It's a very impressive dashboard. I was fiddling with it over the last few days, and I'll be using it frequently, and we'll let our members and our partners and our colleagues know about it, so we can kind of spread the word of the utility of this. Obviously our members are bathed in data. I mean, for businesses to succeed, they have to kind of know what's out there. It's pretty much existential, especially for certain businesses that live and die on what their sales, what they're spending, what their just the whole milieu. What I think is, I think my real takeaway from this data, and you were talking about the cradle to career earlier, is that there's a whole lot of data out there, but nobody uses it very well. Or maybe nobody really uses it. And I think that what would be a real step change in public policy development and analysis would be getting people to understand how to take this data and use it beneficially. I was just reading the clips this morning, and there was a piece in Cal Matters about this parole program that's the Department of Corrections runs, and they're doing Cal Matters is doing a takedown of this program, and the findings are it's a 10-year-old program of managing parolees. The department doesn't know how many people are enrolled in the program. They don't know how many people have completed the program. They don't know which services these people have used in the program. They think that 2 out of 5 parolees completed one service of the 5. It's not clear if anybody's completed all of the services. It just goes on and on and on. And so there's this expensive, far-reaching program that somebody, well, the legislature, thought was a great idea, put a bunch of money into it, and they have no idea if it's working. Closer to home, there's the local control funding formula, which is the innovation that started with, well, anyway, there's a lot of history to it. Governor Brown got it implemented early in his administration, and it sends out money. Everybody on the call probably knows this, but it sends out money to schools based on a variety of factors. A lot of it having to do with poverty, disadvantagedness, foster, factors like that. And there was a lot of hope that this would help with equity by using these larger factors. But from my perspective, and others can disagree, maybe Carl disagrees, I don't know. It never had the potential to really dig into the need to make a difference, because the money was distributed on a district basis as opposed to a school basis. There was a lot of debate over this early on, and it was decided that the money would be distributed school district by school district to 1,000 school districts, as opposed to school by school, where you could obviously get more radical and more pinpointed targeting of disadvantaged populations, because they would manifest more at a school level as opposed to a district level. And that's an area where you can use data profoundly. If you believe that that's the case, which I do and others may not, you can use data in a profound way to target spending, to make a difference in students' lives. And then, don't get me started on using data as sort of an iterative assessment of how schools are performing. We can get into that later if you want. So anyway, this is obviously something I care a lot about, but we have a real long way to go in California government to be able to make it work.
Yeah, thank you for that, Carl. And that example, I think, most state programs are not assessed, right? We don't track. And that is a great question of like, what should be tracked and when, and is there a threshold and how would we know it works or it's good or it could work and we just need to do something different to make it work, like LCFF? Like, is this the starting point? And now we iterate around, improving its delivery and implementation. And I agree, a lot more attention to how, once things, get signed, how it gets implemented, right? It's really hard, in a state of 40 million, that's incredibly diverse, to design well and implement well. And that's a perfect transition to our next question and an upcoming resource that California Competes is putting around user-centered design. So how do we, a number of states have amazing statewide longitudinal data systems that never get used. So how do we actually ensure that data gets used? We have a one-pager that sort of summarizes how we think this dashboard can launch conversations. This dashboard will not tell you any whys. Why is it that educational attainment is really high in the Bay Area and less so in other regions? Our dashboard will not tell you the why, but it is a starting place for conversations to figure out the why. I would love to hear from each of you, or anyone that perhaps, if you have something you want to share around a time when you were able to leverage data to move forward better decision making. What did that process look like? How did you engage folks around the data? What data did you use? And then how did you come to a better decision using data? Because I think a lot of people, as you said, Lauren, there's a lot of data out there. We used 15 to build this, plus a handful of others to build crosswalks between the 15 we used. But it's hard to access. So I'd love to hear any stories from you about using data to bring people together to make better decisions.
Sure, I'll start. So the question when I was superintendent in Long Beach, the media does this May, June coverage of kids that get into elite institutions, Ivy Leagues, that sort of thing. But we ask ourselves, where do Long Beach high school graduates actually go? What does the data tell us? And the answer came back, over 2/3 of them go to two institutions, Long Beach City College and California State University, Long Beach. And what that brought about was our working with those institutions to break down barriers. So we coined the phrase seamless education. How do you bring institutions together that have been isolated, even though geographically they're close to each other? And the other thing we found out, much to the benefit of the economic bottom line, is that the philanthropy community was really interested in this. And so we got money from the Clark Foundation, the Knight Foundation, Arthur Vining Davis, all in support of how we could make transitions much more seamless. And it's taken off. Today, it's even better. There's a Long Beach promise that gives academic support to youngsters who go from the K-12 system to Long Beach City College and beyond. So that was just a clear example of our posing a question to ourselves, getting an answer, rolling up our sleeves and working with institutions that we really had not worked to close those barriers on. So that really worked for us.
And Carl, I feel like you sort of snuck it in there, but this was the launch of what's now known as the Long Beach Promise, and is a national model for connecting K-12 and higher education.
Right.
And I did not know that that was the launch. So wow.
Yeah.
Valerie, Lauren, did you have? Right, Valerie.
Yeah, I mean, I think the Long Beach College Promise model is an excellent one. You know, I'll speak on one that is probably less well known, but I think equally important. You know, there's a lot of interest in sort of the other side of that sort of workforce, like part of the continuum. And I think, you know, a place where we know and saw data was really consequential was in how efforts to support really entrepreneurship by women of color in particular in the 90s. In the 80s and 90s, there was a push toward like cosmetology, for example. And I think what we saw over time was that the data bore that those students were actually being pushed into fields that may be relevant and were of interest, but were not actually resulting in higher wages. Now, that doesn't mean no one needs cosmetology. You know, certainly I and others would love to, you know, have our hair and nails and all those things done, but maybe that those programs as set up were not what was translating into the increased wages that we often want to associate with entrepreneurship, in which case we could still encourage people to do that, but then maybe they're doing actually more of like a business focus, right? And those are places where then they might see the wages that we're sort of looking for. I think another place, like when you think about data-based decision-making, especially in the community college and to some extent the four-year institutions, has been around developmental education reform. So despite this having been a hot topic for at least the last sort of 20 or so years, what we've seen in the last couple of years is in 2017, the legislature passed AB 705, which required California community colleges to demonstrate that students were more likely to succeed if they took developmental education courses. To date, our office has not received any evidence of that. And so really it's pushed colleges to encourage to place students at college level math and English. And what we see is that in general, most students will do well if provided with adequate supports when they're in transfer level courses. And so this is a place where sort of you got to look at the data a different way, sort of the absence of evidence. But I think this is, you know, again, to your point about the dashboard, where looking at dashboards, it does not necessarily tell you the why, but it should tell you, give you some breadcrumbs as to sort of what you see, what you don't see, and what those things mean is really about conversation with your colleagues.
Lauren, I wanted to turn to you and give you a chance if there was an example that comes to mind around.
Yeah, I'll just maybe in the spirit of what Valerie was talking about, this is more along the lines of check your work. We were working on a project with Kaiser Permanente that needed was doing a lot of construction of health facilities in the Sacramento region, wanted to make sure that the workforce was going to be available, found out that there was some real problems having a construction workforce for these specialized facilities over the next decade. And so we were working with them to come up with some strategies to improve that workforce in the region. They have a real public purpose attitude as well. So we were working with contractors on this, and we went to the basic data source for this sort of activity called the Labor Market Information Service, which is run out of Employment Development Department. And they gave us numbers for various kinds of construction workforces that we were going to use as sort of a basic planning document. But then we also surveyed the contractors that we were working with, who would be the main folks building these facilities over the next decade. as to what they saw their actual needs for these different workers, whether they're carpenters or HVAC or the whole elevator, whatever it might be, electricians. Okay, so what we found, just cutting to the chase, is that for the contractors, the businesses that we were talking to, that represented probably 20% of the workforce demand for the region over the 10 years. Their need was about, for 20% of the demand, their need equaled what the labor market division said was needed in California. So there was a 5x difference between what the state statistics said we needed and what we found in our research was needed. So there's nothing will substitute on the ground research when it's when you really need it. But if that's not there, you just need that. You need to sort of check multiple sources and make sure because the data is, I'm sure there are phrases for this, but the data is only as good as what gets put in and is solid in the first place. And so that's the other real caution to this.
If I could just add one thing, I think Lauren sort of mentioned it early on. I do think it's important to keep in mind these resources like this dashboard, and I think someone put this in the chat, there are a lot of them out there. I mean, this one, like I said, not just because I worked on it, I think it's really nice and comprehensive in an important way that's useful for California. But I do think it's important, yes, it's pulling from multiple sources. Yes, I saw in the Q&A, it's not the most up to date, but I think many of the issues that we're dealing with when we think about the, P20 continuum, they're not new, right? And so I think the obsession over having the most up-to-date data for everything is a little bit misplaced, and that we would do well by being clear on what problem are we looking to understand? What do we know or not know already? How does this additional dashboard or these additional features of a dashboard help better understand and get clear on the problem or the solution or what we don't know or what we do know? Right. And that, the cradle to career, I'm as excited as anyone for it. And it will help solve a lot of our challenges, but it doesn't mean that we don't have information that can be leveraged. There is a ton of information that already exists. And so I think you should take this dashboard, people should take it as the resource that it is to help allow you to resurface questions, right, about why things are, how you understand and think about equity gaps, and the extent to which the tools we have right now would actually demonstrate progress, given that we know there's a lot of hard work happening, whether it is on the workforce development and economic development side or throughout the education continuum. People are doing work. How do we see that work reflected in the data that's presented?
That is, I really appreciate that point, Valerie. I'm currently working on a paper, and I've been spending time in the state archives looking at sort of our state's thinking around higher ed in the mid-1900s. And I will tell you, it's shocking the number of issues that were raised at that time that are still the same issues that we are facing today around total cost of attendance, transfer, who has access, faculty workloads, and how we pay for higher ed. I mean, the issues are universal. And I would invite the person who made the comment about the data. We love feedback. We're really excited about this update, and we keep a document of, next, if we do this again, here's what we would update. So if there are data sources that you're aware of, please let us know, and we were happy to dig in and investigate them. A lot of the lag is, it takes a while for the data sources to come out. that, they've got to collect the data, they've got to clean the data, they've got to publish the data, and then we've got to analyze the data and create the dashboard. And so there's, the lag on both ends. But we are doing our best to have more recent, and we get the pandemic, we're very curious about some of that. We do have, though, some survey data during the pandemic that we've analyzed. It's not yet out. But if there are questions that folks have, please reach out to us. We love to hear people's questions, and sometimes we can answer them, quickly via email, even if, it won't make it maybe into a briefer report. But if it's something that you're curious about or you want to understand for your own work, please reach out to us, and we're happy to answer questions as we can. And then I also wanted to, just thank you, the three of you, for your work in our state. I think this dashboard really highlights how immense, public service is in our state, how immense it is to serve our state. We talk about diversity, inclusiveness, and I think our state makes that work really hard. But I think everybody knows that, like, the strength of our state's economy and our democracy, our communities, is not going to get solved, is not going to advance without including all Californians, because we have to serve all Californians. So thank you so much for your service in that way. I realized we didn't really have time for questions. Actually, there was one maybe quick question that was targeted to Carl. And a lot of questions about the dashboard, and we will follow up with folks with answers to those questions if we know who it's from. If not, feel free just to email me or Carolyn. Our info's on the website with your questions, and we will absolutely get back to you. We love talking about this. So I will ask Carl the question. And I also, before I do, want to flag that I sit on our state's Cradle to Career Data Systems Governing Board. And so I'm taking the lessons that we learn in building this dashboard and the questions, information, requests that we are getting to help inform and guide our state's development of this dashboard, which I hope, frankly, will take over this work. And we will no longer do this dashboard because our state will be doing it with much better data. So Carl, if you have 1 minute to answer this question that came through, how does the dashboard lessen the extreme pressures placed on superintendents? And does its contribution apply to rural as well as larger urban districts? And I feel like you may have addressed a fair amount of that already, but since that question came in, I did.
This gets back to this dashboard, I think will be extremely helpful. Gets back to Lauren's comment about where we went with LCFF. And gap closing is so much of the media analysis of progress is around standardized test scores and whether or not the gap actually closes. And Cal Matters, Dan Walters and others have been particularly focused on that. I would argue that you can make progress in other areas that may well lead to change over time. And it's important to roll up your sleeves and start making that progress. In the Long Beach School District, the gap as measured by test scores didn't close until years 5 through 10 of my time there. But there was a lot going on with regard to access, with regard to youngsters who were completing high school coursework, who were eligible for both UC and the state college system. So I think it's important to be careful. A lot of progress can in fact be made. I think the Supreme Court decisions point up the need to roll up our sleeves, go to work, and make K-12 even better. I gave a talk at Notre Dame University last Friday, and you all probably know this, but because of Prop 209, all of higher ed is going to be beating a path to California to figure out how you continue to raise up diversity, equity, and inclusion as we move forward with these court decisions. So, yeah.
Thank you for that, Carl. And I think
Sure.
to your point and Valerie's earlier point, we did explore doing longitudinal data in the dashboard. And what we saw when we did the analysis is that there was so little change over time for as far back as we could go. We thought it wasn't worth the added layer of complexity. So yeah, it can be hard to see these changes, especially sort of at the level that we're looking. So I know we're a little over time. Thank you everyone for hanging on. Hopefully this was an informative and conversation to you all as it was for me. And again, I want to welcome anyone to reach out with thoughts, questions, and we're happy to come and meet with folks or present this to other groups too. But take care and happy Monday, everyone.